it's worth 1 cent, but just because it costs you 4 cents to produce, it doesn't mean that its value to the economy is just 1 cent, right? Like there are second order effects to that coin being in circulation that might actually increase its value. That comparison of, it's worth a cent and it cost us 4 cents to produce, that means we're losing money on it, isn't necessarily the best way to think about it. Welcome to today's edition of Market Outsiders. It's Thursday, November 13th, and it is the end of an era. Penny minting is no more in the United States. This does not mean that pennies are no longer in circulation, but there are no longer any new pennies being minted. This episode will be worth more than 1 cent of your time, I promise. Before we get into this penny news, Jenny Ray, how are you today?
Hi, Naman. I'm really excited to talk about this. This is random, right? This isn't necessarily big or core news, but the reason that I wanted to do this episode today is that I think it's important that we think about these kinds of decisions as business people from a multifaceted decision-making stance. And I also think, what are we going to do without the phrase "save your pennies"? Right? Maybe we should save more pennies. I don't know. So I'm really kind of curious to talk a little bit about this decision, the potential advisors that were behind the scenes and thinking through it, and factors other than just, was it a great cost or another decision? Because governments present in case interviews and in business thought in general opportunities to think about more than just the bottom line. So I'm really excited to dive into the conversation today. First of all, do you have pennies? Do you carry cash? Like what's your stash like right now? My dad had a jar of pennies growing up, and whenever he needed something for us to do, he would put his pennies in there, and then he would have us go through them and look for some of the pennies that were valuable. And I think we found one that was worth like $10 one time. But now, as a mom, I kind of realized, it wasn't actually about finding value in the pennies. It was about finding value in him having the freedom of 10 minutes to do something else.
I'm sure I've got pennies at the bottom of my sock drawer. I probably have more pennies in other currencies than I do in US dollars because I try to collect currency when I go abroad. And so those are sitting somewhere in my house. If I carry cash, it's usually just to give it away. That's the only reason I carry cash in my wallet. But if I'm transacting, I'm using a credit card. So this doesn't affect me personally, but it does affect a lot of other people and businesses in a much more comprehensive way. Before we get to that, Jenny Ray, let me just share the numbers very, very quickly.
Okay.
It costs the U.S. Mint almost 4 cents to produce every penny. So it's worth 1 cent. We're spending 4 cents to make it. Okay, the math isn't mathing there, but that's what was happening. And the U.S. Treasury projects that it'll save $56 million a year by stopping production of the penny. You and I were talking earlier today, and I said that's not even big enough to be considered a rounding error in the U.S. government's budget. So the cost savings were way less than I expected. Like $50 million is nice, but for a government that runs multi-trillion-dollar deficits, okay, so what? So okay, good. It's a signal that this administration cares about cost savings. It probably makes sense from a financial perspective, but as you mentioned, governments manage to a triple bottom line. It's not just surpluses and deficits. They have other criteria that they make decisions by. If you were in a case interview or if you were in a consulting team at Bain, outside of cost savings, what else would you be thinking about if you were advising the U.S. Treasury here?
Yeah, I like this. So there is a potential chance that there would be inflationary or deflationary effects from removing pennies from circulation, not immediately, but perhaps in the long term. So that would be one of the first things. And I've seen this in other countries. You don't see a price of a mango at $1.99. Every mango is $2. Right. And that kind of rounding process to the nearest 5 cent at this point, dollar amount might actually accumulate into enough economic change that would lead to that. Most people are not going to necessarily round down. So rounding up would be kind of one of those potential risks. So probably some data around if price changes were going to happen. If, again, the constraint is not today. The last mint was just placed, but let's assume in 1 to 2 to 3 years, which direction are merchants going to go? The second one are heavy cash users, right? What is the mix of cash that people carry? Who are our primary cash users? This is both from a political standpoint. So who am I disenfranchising? And also who am I kind of, advocating for or supporting in terms of policy? I could imagine that credit card companies would be pretty excited about the removal of a penny, because if all of a sudden I can't make exact change, or a merchant can't, it's driving the spend, the share of wallet that is spent from cash onto a card even further than it is today. So that mix of share on the card versus in cash, and also the mix of who spends it, I think would be critically important. And then finally, there's a nostalgic value to the penny. The penny has been a very important part of American currency. It's kind of been one of those bedrocks of American society. And so, is that $50 million savings a year worth the change in the nostalgia? We spend a lot of money from the federal government for things that are also nostalgic. We have national parks, right? They're recreational, but they're also nostalgic. National parks don't make enough money to exist. And so when we're thinking about the triple bottom line, is there some kind of American pride or value that is attached to the nostalgia that matters to American people? So I would imagine that all of these decisions were probably supported by at least a small amount, if not a very wide scale data gathering exercise on the value of a penny for the American people. What did I miss, Naman? What else would you have thought about in terms of some of the characteristics of this decision?
Yeah, well, the first thing I would have thought of, you mentioned, which is the mix between cash and digital payments. So cash payments still make up 14% of transactions in the U.S. Look, it's a small number in terms of percentage, but that's 14% in a $20 trillion economy.
14% of dollar amount or 14% of units?
That's a good question. I am almost sure that it's 14% of the dollar amount, not the volume of transactions. So it's still a significant amount of money that's exchanging hands literally instead of digitally. And so that's the first thing I would have looked at. The second thing I would have looked at is the regulatory framework. And what I mean by that is it's not actually in every jurisdiction legal for businesses to round. And so, if you are running short on pennies and you haven't changed your pricing, what are you supposed to do? How do you make exact change? How do you communicate pricing to customers? It's also not legal to charge different customer segments different prices for the same product or service. And so you can't necessarily charge a different price to a card user than you can to a cash user. The way that businesses get around this right now is they charge card surcharges, right? That's not changing the price of the product. That's an additional fee. And so,
which is also, by the way, illegal. As a merchant, I happen to know that you're still not allowed to do it. But it's like speed limits, right? It's kind of one of those generally accepted business practices that are totally over prosecuted. Yeah.
Right. But there's uncertainty now, right? For certain kinds of businesses, right? Like one of the businesses that's been most vocal about this change is Burger King, right? And they say that significant portion of their customer base comes in and pays with cash, and they have stores and franchisees that are running out of pennies and they don't know how to make change. And so what they're having to do is round up. And so it doesn't sound like a big deal if you're giving someone 4 cents more change on one transaction, but you scale that across an entire franchisee's footprint or a network, and all of a sudden that starts to make a material difference. And so look, Congress, it's very difficult to get Congress ahead of most things. And so I think what the administration's probably thinking here is we can force Congress or we can force state legislatures to catch up on the regulatory side of things if we go ahead and just make this change, because no one's going to do it if we haven't already gotten rid of the penny. But that's causing some short-term disruption for certain kinds of businesses who don't necessarily know what to do or can't get access to the change they need.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, because we're talking a little bit about government leaders, but business leaders will need to have policies and practices in place for how to contend with this. I want to go back, though, to one of the conversations. Can you maybe explain for people, why this came up now? What are the change moments that are happening now? Clearly, the cost of everything has gone up. But one of the numbers that I read, and I don't know if this is true in the article that you looked at, was that the numbers have doubled in the last decade, which means that we were already losing money on the penny prior to that. So I actually don't know when we started losing money on the penny, but it was, if it doubled to 3.7 now, right, it was at 1.85 a decade ago, which was already losing money on the actual manufacture of the penny. So why now? Why this change? What are some of the things that may have changed, not just in the last decade, but in that factor or in that decision?
Yeah, it's a good question. One question that I still have is that the right way to think about the penny? It's worth 1 cent, but just because it costs you 4 cents to produce, it doesn't mean that its value to the economy is just 1 cent, right? Like there are second order effects to that coin being in circulation that might actually increase its value.
That's a powerful concept that people need to think through.
Right, because it's actually used in it's used in, I would think, thousands of transactions. It's used to support economic activity beyond like 1 cent one time, but your cost was just 4 cents one time. And so I think that comparison of, well, it's worth a cent and it cost us 4 cents to produce, that means we're losing money on it, isn't necessarily the best way to think about it.
That
But I
makes sense
do,
because basically, like, nobody's actually buying the penny from you for a
right,
dollar, right? And what you're actually generating is some number of people that are gonna touch that penny will be significantly larger than 4, and
correct.
maybe the factor that we have not yet considered, which is how many transactions will that single penny enable, and will there be a lower number of transactions, because the penny is not in place? And I think that's one of the hypotheses maybe that they're making, is that the number of transactions is going to stay the same. If you used a penny, it was for convenience, not for necessity. And then you're able to switch over to a different modality, or if you're a merchant, just change your freaking prices. Yeah.
And I think that's fair. I think it also just shows you the times we're living in. Like the nickel is the new penny. Things are getting more expensive, right? Now
Even
you
if-
asked me, I'm sorry, what was that? Save your nickels and your dimes because they're coming for them next. Now you asked me why now, right? And I think that's a good question. Look, we'll have to ask the Treasury Secretary, and he'll be able to tell us exactly why now. But look, I think you and I agree that this doesn't necessarily make a meaningful difference to the government deficit, but
Huh?
there's a helpful signal that the administration takes spending and spending cuts seriously. I think that's right. We're talking about it. You're seeing the BBC talk about it, CNBC talk about it. Like if there was another $50 million line item that had been cut from the federal budget, we would never know about it. And we would definitely not be talking about it. So I think the value politically, the value to the government is in the press. It's because like we know the penny, we grew up with the penny, it's something we touch. And so it's a signal, hey, like we take spending seriously and we take spending cuts seriously. And I think it's also it's something that's easy to accomplish. Like you can literally turn off the presses and it's done. And so for those reasons, I think it happened now as opposed to maybe 10 or 15 years ago. It's a signal more than, maybe a meaningful policy change.
Can I also just mention one thing about that I was thinking about before? And I didn't mention this, but I should have put this in my initial structure. And sometimes this will happen to y'all as you're thinking through business problems. Later, the other ideas come up. But how difficult is it to switch off the presses? Are we talking about like, blowing up the presses in the middle of a military exercise? Or are we just going to leave them there? Are they going to go to a museum?
Can
This
they
is
be repurposed?
actually pretty you have capital that was deployed for these that you could repurpose, but also if you simply bring them offline, what's to stop you from bringing them back online if we decide that the disruptions are there? And so there is a cost to shut down divisions like this, potentially to lay off people that were operating the penny presses, but there also may be a very nominal, very small cost to restart that process. So it could be a two-way door. There are many decisions in business that are not, right? Once you move down a pathway, it is incredibly high friction to move backwards. But this might be one of those decisions where it's actually a fairly low risk to stop it. You get the press out of it. You identify what the effects are. You have a leeway into the timing for circulation where you could make an announcement in 6 months, a year, 2 years, and reverse that decision if it becomes important and material. But as far as I know, and I don't know a lot about this because I'm not a currency or a coin expert, but internationally, I would suspect that very few people who have gone this direction have actually moved back into minting.
That sounds right. And I like the language that you used there, two-way door. That's a question I ask myself multiple times a day. Is this a one-way or a two-way door? And really what you mean by that is this a reversible decision? And if it's an easily reversible decision, then my rule for business is I make it quickly. If it's a one-way door, if it's not easily reversible, that's where you spend a lot of time building alignment, consensus, doing the analytical work, right? Making sure that you've got all your ducks in a row before you walk through that door. This is a concept that Jeff Bezos really made popular in one of his early shareholder letters in the early days at Amazon. And it's always stuck with me. And so you're right. Like if this is an easily reversible decision, make it quickly because you might just be able to turn the presses back on.
Exactly. I doubt that that's actually true in this situation.
Yeah, in this situation.
Should be simply a point of evaluation, because in the situation where you're losing money on every penny that is printed per value, right? If it costs me 4 cents to print a penny, to add that penny into circulation, into the the net circulatory coinage, et cetera, then, yeah, we should start with the hypothesis that we should axe it. Like, that should have been the hypothesis for the last
Yeah.
probably decades. So all the rest of this stuff has to then make its own case against it. So my hypothesis would be that this was the right decision fiscally and practically, that it will not have significant effects on a significant portion of the population. One of the things that you didn't really dive into but glanced on that I just want to also reemphasize is that a decade ago, that you said it was 86% ish of transactions are on card. I mean, a decade ago, I doubt that number was that high. So there was probably a tipping point that, an academic identified years ago for when we really don't need to actually print any more cash. And when it just is not becoming super critical and important. But the rise of peer-to-peer payments, the rise of their ability to become a very nimble merchant processor has really adopted into some of the platforms like Square and Stripe and PayPal and Venmo, right? All of these US-based transaction payments processors are providing opportunities for this to become less important.
Look, I agree. I think it was the right call at the end of the day. I am not going to miss the penny myself. It doesn't sound like you're going to miss the penny. Burger King might miss the penny. There might be some businesses or consumers that do, but big picture in this economy, in the way that we do business today, penny's no longer a critical part of our monetary infrastructure, I think it's fair to say.
No, let me actually
Is
mention.
your dad going to miss the penny?
My dad is probably hoarding pennies right now. My dad is probably taking every penny. He's probably asking for 5 pennies instead of a nickel every time he gets change somewhere. I'm guessing. I should totally call him and ask him.
If you run a small or medium-sized business, you know how fast cyber risks are evolving. That's why I use Nord products myself. And for businesses, there's Nord Stellar. It's a threat exposure management platform that helps you spot cyber threats before they become full-blown incidents. Nord Stellar combines data breach and dark web monitoring, attack surface management, and cyber squatting protection, all in one platform. It gives you real-time visibility into leaked credentials, exposed assets, and impersonation attempts so you can act before attackers do. Think of it as seeing what hackers see and fixing it first. Right now, Nord Stellar has an exclusive Black Friday offer. Unlock 20% off with code BLACKFRIDAY20, but only until December 10th, 2025. Visit nordstellar.com/simplified to secure your business today.
So if you are a Penny user, the last thing that I just wanted to say, this kind of just came to me, but this would be the kind of analysis that I would be really thrilled if somebody brought up inside a case interview. Our tipping culture. Our tipping culture has actually oriented us in a way that I think is honestly a little bit absurd. The number of times that you're asked for a tip per day feels like it has increased an order of magnitude in the past even 4 to 5 years. Part of that is that, with inflationary pressure and labor retention, it is valuable for people to offer tips as a portion of compensation. But because of that, it is becoming much more common to just round up, right? Or provide something more than what the original value of an item was. And, you see tipping in all kinds of service situations. I see tipping at farmers markets now, right? I can tip somebody for handing me a loaf of sourdough bread at a farmers market. But anyhow, one fascinating piece of analysis that is probably not core to this decision, but that would lead to an insight around what we talked about earlier, which was that kind of rounding impact, would just be, how many tip frequencies are you naturally given, and how comfortable are you rounding up or rounding to the nearest dollar in a lot of other situations. Because I think the more that becomes culturally acceptable, the easier it gets to get to some of these different numbers that don't end in 0.99.
That's interesting. I have lots of thoughts on tipping culture. I won't share them today, but I do think that's an interesting connection.
And that's the kind of thing that if a candidate was able to say, here's one of the ways that I would identify, not just to say I'm interested in knowing, right, how many, what the impact of rounding would be, but specifically how I would measure it. That's one of the ways that you would up getting the data. I think that could be incredibly, incredibly compelling. So Naman, if we don't have pennies, but there are people out there that have pennies, maybe we should set a penny aside for our kids and see, what that turns into someday. Do you have something else that's not a penny?
Something else that I what? I'm sorry?
That you collect that's not a penny.
So I actually collect cash from different countries. And so I've got like a Ziploc bag. And so the goal is that one day I can hand that to my kids and say, here you go, like go travel the world. Here's like, $5 in every currency. Get a hot dog on me. And it's a way to kind of expose them to different cultures and stories from my life, before they were here. And so I do collect money for that purpose. But other than that, I collect money for the purpose of paying my bills.
Well, now today, love that, by the way. Today, from my dad to you, here's the recommendation. This money is not just for your kids to spend, it's actually also for them to count and play with. And if you ever run out of other interesting and engaging toys and tools inside your house, now you have another one straight from my daddy-o. So if you've enjoyed this conversation, we know that it is not necessarily the same type of thing that we always do. And that's exactly our purpose every day, is to not have one type of conversation, but to have the ability to think critically about news, about business impacts, about opportunities to shape the future, and to hone your business acumen and your decision-making ability. And great business leaders fundamentally do look at numbers, and they look at numbers first, but they also understand bigger picture than numbers. And so if you were the head of Palm Pilot and you looked at the numbers, you wouldn't necessarily have come to the same conclusion that, for example, someone at Apple did at the same time, right? So thinking through both the first order and also the second and third order effects by looking at other organizations like nonprofits and governments can really help hone your ability to see further than what today's data will tell you. So we hope that you enjoyed this episode for that reason. If you haven't already liked us, followed along, or sent us a message about a future conversation that you'd love for us to have, we would love for you to bring that to our attention. Otherwise, have a great rest of your day, your week, and we will see you next week.